Hi everybody, this is purchasing, and this week we're going to be doing a recap of chapter 8, which is on purchase specifications. This is a real important chapter. It's also one of those things that most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about. They just buy things. They don't really put a lot of thought into all that goes into it. So I think this is a really important chapter to learn from. If you remember the very first of the class, I asked people a peanut butter question. You go to the store and why do you buy a certain peanut butter? And a lot of times it came down to price. And that's how we find a lot of people when they are doing their specifications, they can't get past the price issue. They want the least expensive one. And that's understandable. Sometimes people are on budgets and things, but there's actually a lot more that goes into it. It won't be long, but we're going to start to get into our can cutting, and that's going to give you a little bit more of an idea about how we write specs for certain products and what to look for. So anyway, an overview of the chapter. You've got a product specification and a purchase specification. You should know the difference between those two. And a product specification is basically what is the product, what are the qualities about it, what are the things we're going to look for, and we're going to talk about a whole list of those here in just a bit. The purchase specification is a little bit broader. It's going to include the specifics on the product, but then also anything that might be included as a service from the company. It may be when it's going to be delivered, what time it's going to be delivered, how often it's going to be delivered, things like that, or maybe it's an item that might be processed by the company. So basically a much broader description of the whole purchase. Now, well, every company should do a product specification. In other words, this is the product I want and these are the different qualities I'm looking for. Usually only the bigger companies do a purchase specification. Companies are going to have a long-term relationship with a company. We're going to buy from Springfield Grocer and we plan to buy from them for the next 5 years. So we're going to set up a lot of purchase specifications for the different products to make sure that there's no confusion about what we expect of them, what they're going to expect of us, and so on. So how do you write purchase specifications? Well, that's a great question. Now your book gives you a couple examples. The book has you go to the USDA.gov website, which is a real interesting website. It's got 1 million pieces of information on it. If you sift through all that, if you can find the standards section, which is USDA.gov and standards, you can actually find some real interesting information on different products. I kid you not when I say there is a 63-page booklet on apple selection and inspection on this website. It's more than you'll ever want to know about apples. Conversely, the Brussels sprout section is only 17 pages long. But it gives you a lot of information on how to write a spec on specific products. There are some other sources, but some of them cost. You have to join, be a member and things, but the government's a good way to go. So you ask, well, okay, we can get information on what to put in a spec, who should write that spec. You've got an owner, operator, you might have the ordering person, you might have the chef or the user, you might have a combination of those three. I think one of the key things left out of the book is, should your client actually have a say-so, per se, in what you order? You know, we go back to writing the menu. The menu tells us who our clientele is going to be, what our pricing structure should be and such. I think you have to look at your menu and your client to also give you an idea of what should go into that spec, and we overlook that sometimes. Like I said, this goes in really well to our can cutting as we're starting to write these specs. And you know you'll be doing a can cutting project here later on in the semester to turn in. But for those of you who've worked in a restaurant before, think about the last time you got a new product in. Did you actually do a comparison of these products? What were you looking for? Or did someone say, we need ketchup? And the sales rep said, okay, let me send you some. That is typically how people order today. Or, we need ketchup. The sales rep will say, I've got this one. The owner says, well, what's it cost? And that's about as far as it goes. Sales rep says, well, it's $18 a case, and the next thing you know, that's it. Why do we need specifications? Well, because there's a whole lot of questions that were not answered in that little bit of communication there. We take ketchup. Well, how does that ketchup come? Does it come in number 10 cans, which is those really large, usually 6 to a case cans? Or does it come in bags? Or does it come in little packets? Or does it come in 16-ounce bottles? What brand of ketchup is that? Is there a water content listed? Some ketchup, when you do these can cuttings, you'll notice you put, how we test ketchup, we put ketchup on a plate and we let it sit for a couple hours. And we see how much it runs, because that tells us how much water content is in there. More water, less tomato, less flavor type of thing. But that's why specifications are important, because if we don't exactly know what we're going to order, we can't be sure of our quality when we get it in, and so the quality of our food that we're going to sell. Our pricing structure may not be the same. The yield may not be the same. We're used to buying one product and we get X amount out of a case, but now we switch product because of price, and we find out we get less product per usable case. So that's kind of why we do that. So some of the things that go on a specification sheet, and you can do an informal, which is kind of a casual and list a few things, or you can do a formal specification sheet, which is going to list everything you could possibly want to use at or to look at. And your book lists a whole bunch of them, which are actually really good if you're going to write a good spec sheet. And we're going to go through some of those. One of the first ones is intended use. What are you going to use the product for? Because that's going to make a big difference. Eggs are a good example, and I've used this one in class before. If you're going to be doing cakes, say you run a bakery, do you want to buy the most expensive AA eggs, or might you go ahead and get a lesser grade egg, which basically a lesser grade egg just has more of a spread to it, and use a less expensive lower grade egg? Conversely, if you're going to do Joe's House of Sunny Side Up eggs, you're going to tend to buy a more expensive egg and a higher grade egg, because the egg yolk is going to stand up better. So intended use is real important. Exact name of the product. There may be a brand that you're going to use. We only use Hunt's ketchup. Fine. We only use A1 sauce instead of just some type of steak sauce. We also have these things called Packer brands, and a little bit more at the very end of the chapter of this. Packer brands are specific brands that companies have come up with to use. Cisco is a great example, and there's a big layout in your book on this one, that they have Cisco Imperial, Cisco Classic, Cisco Supreme, Cisco Serene, Cisco Reliance, and theirs are all, basically you can have green beans, and they've got 6 different cans of green beans depending on what grade or quality you want. So a lot of companies have come out with their own product. U.S. Food used to have a great line of salad dressings. They were actually better than most other companies. But these are called Packer brands. And so if you're okay with a Packer brand, you need to let your sales rep know when you write your spec. Quality grades. Things such as prime, choice, select when it comes to meat, or grade 1, grade 2 for produce, A or AA for eggs, those types of things. Now, the one problem with that, we see especially like with meat, we can say I want a choice steak, but there's actually a high-end choice, a middle, and a low-end choice. So if you don't spec this out, choice is choice. We can say I want choice that is close to prime, all right? And basically when we're specing meat, we'll talk more about this later on, it has to do with the intramuscular fat content, how much fat really is running through it. So there's really no great black and white line where one ends and the other one begins. So anyway, when you're buying something, there's some leeway there on the grades. Size information. Each per case, for example, we buy potatoes. We'll buy 100 count potatoes, which means there's 100 per case. We can buy 90 count potatoes, which there are 90 per case, so it's bigger potato than the 100. We buy apples that way. We buy shrimp. 10 to 20, or 20-21 shrimp means there's 20 to 21 shrimp per pound. So we can buy them by the each. We can buy them by the weight. We can buy them by the count. But those are all specs you should put in there so you know exactly what you're going to get. Acceptable waste or trim. Alright, this is a great one when it comes to meat. Years ago, I saw an ad in the paper, and this is 25 years ago. Saw an ad in the paper, it said you can buy ground beef for basically $2.99 a pound if you buy a side of beef. In other words, a whole side of a cow. So this is great. So I went in and I told the guy, yeah, I'd love to buy one of these. So he said, all right, come back Wednesday, pick up your order. Well, I went in to pick up my side of beef, thinking I was getting a great deal. And the guy said, well, let me show you what we got here. Because this is basically the beef that you've ordered. And basically he showed me this little tiny steak that was about like this, that was surrounded by this much fat. He said, now this is what you bought. But if you like to do our executive trim, we can basically take all that extra fat off and make it just like a little tiny bit of fat trim. But of course that's going to make the price about $3 more a pound. Well, there went the savings, there went the best, but I was too embarrassed to say no. So I ended up buying an incredibly big amount of really overly expensive beef. So knowing the amount of trim is an important thing. Package sizing and type. Another good one. I go back to ketchup. Am I going to buy ketchup in number 10 cans? Am I going to buy little packets? If I'm going to buy bottles. We recently had one with liquid eggs. Why would we buy liquid eggs? Well, they're quicker than someone cracking a whole bunch of shell eggs. So I buy liquid eggs, usually in a quart container. However, we got these big 10-pound bags of eggs with a spigot on it. Much harder to use than the quarts, but it's a cheaper price because you're buying them in bulk. Milk is another great example. Do I buy milk in the gallon? Do I buy milk in little containers? Do I buy milk in large dispenser bags? You got to know what you're ordering. Preservation and processing methods. I want green beans. All right. Do I want refrigerated, fresh, frozen, dried, dehydrated, canned? What exactly am I looking for? I want canned green beans. Okay. Do I want baby green beans? Do I want French cut green beans? What sieve size? And sieve size has to do with what size of green bean. Alright, so the smaller the sieve size, the tinier the green bean is. The tinier the green bean, the more tender it is. Alright? Why does that matter? Well, it matters if you're going to say do a buffet where you're going to put out a bunch of green beans that are going to sit for hours and hours. Little tiny green beans tend to cook down, they get really soft, they fall apart. Older green beans, a little bit bigger, can withstand the heat a little bit more. So that's why you need to know exactly what you're ordering there. Point of origin. Salmon. This is a real good one. You can go to the Walmart grocery stores and you can buy Pacific salmon. And when you think of Pacific salmon, I usually think of the Pacific Coast, Alaska, Oregon. They're known for great salmon up there. Cold water, delicious, lots of fat, lots of flavor. However, when you go to Walmart and you buy their Pacific salmon, when you read the fine print on the package, you'll see that they came from basically the Pacific right by Japan. Completely different water, completely different fish. No flavor, no fat. So when you do your specifications on origin, you might say my Pacific Coast salmon needs to come from Alaska or so-and-so. Shrimp is another good one. Most of the shrimp we get in this country, sadly, comes from Thailand and is farmed. So if you want good old American Gulf shrimp, you've got to specify a point of origin. Packing procedure, big one here is how can I buy it? Can I break cases, for example? So, go back to ketchup. When I buy ketchup, I'm not going to use a lot of it, but do I have to buy a full case of these 6 big number 10 cans? Or will you break that case? In other words, I can buy 1 or 2 cans. We see this a lot of times with like salad dressing or barbecue sauce. Do you really need 6 gallons of barbecue sauce at one time? When I opened my first restaurant, the sales rep didn't tell me cases would break. And he saw the cash register ching, so I ended up buying 6 gallons of Worcestershire sauce, 6 gallons of soy sauce, 6 gallons of sesame oil. You know how long it takes to go through all that? Way too long. So, You need to know about the packaging procedures. Next, degree of ripeness. This is very important when you have produce. All right. If I'm going to say order in bananas, I can order in my full ripe bananas. I can order a green tip banana. I can order a green banana. Depending on what I'm going to use them for, and depending on how long I want them, I can write a spec on those bananas. I can also do that on any other type of produce, for example, depending on how soon I'm going to use it and what the intended use is for. Form. Do I want to buy, I'm going to do some ribeye, all right? So is that an individual pre-cut steak, or is that a whole ribeye, or is that a half a beef? Once again, years ago, I wanted to do ossobuco, which is basically a braised veal shank. It's a lower part of the leg of the veal, and you slow cook it all day, and it's real tender and it's real good. So I ordered ossobuco from one of my purveyors. I did not have a spec. So what came in was a whole leg. In other words, a whole long leg of veal. Well, I didn't have a bandsaw or anything to cut that, so I had to go to a local grocery store, and I offered them free meals if they would cut this meat for me. So if I had a proper spec that said for my ossobuco I wanted to cut veal shank 2.5 to 3 inches tall and no more than 4 inches in diameter, that spec would have saved me the trouble there. Color. Do I want yellow tomatoes? Do I want green tomatoes? Do I want red tomatoes? Do I want green bell peppers? Red grapes? Green grapes? Purple potatoes? Red potatoes? White potatoes? Color can be important. Trade Association standards. One of the big ones is the National Sanitation Foundation, or NSF. You'll see this stamped on equipment all the time. Now, I'll be honest, I have bought equipment that is NSF certified and that is not. KitchenAid mixers is a good example here. You'll pay about $100 more for a KitchenAid mixer that is NSF certified versus one that is not. I've never been able to really find a difference between the two. So is it worth it to you to have that on there? I don't know. Approved substitutes. So I've ordered my Hunt's ketchup in number 10 cans, and the company is out. What do? You need ketchup. So is there an acceptable substitute? Would you accept Heinz? Would you accept Red Gold? Now, one of my issues with this is if you don't set up a standard, you have to make sure that your sales rep or the company you're dealing with understands your policy. And mine has usually been, when in doubt, buy the brand name or buy the best you can. Don't sub it with one of your Packer brands that I don't know or an off-brand. And you'd be amazed to know you can buy like 15 different brands of ketchup. It's a crazy thing. So have an acceptable list of substitutions, because if you don't and you get a substitution, you may not have the same results. Expiration dates. We see this one with heavy cream and milk and such. We were having a problem with Cisco last year where we were getting heavy cream. It literally was expiring 2 days after we got it in. So we had to talk to the purveyor and write a spec that said we will not accept any cream that doesn't have at least a month of shelf life. Did occasionally we still get something with a lower shelf life? Yes, but we would send it back. So that was our spec, and you see that dairy a lot. Chemical standards. This is one where, does this chemical do the job that we're going to need it to do? Does it do it with the right safety precautions? So, and we do order a lot of chemicals for the business, or dish chemicals, equipment cleaning chemicals and stuff. Next, kind of along that line, is test or inspection standards. We want to make sure that these products we buy in work. So we're going to have a specification that says this griddle cleaner that we're buying should be able to clean this griddle within 2 minutes, not produce any noxious or toxic fumes, and leave our griddle sparkling clean. Something like that. Cost and quantity limitations. I mean, sure, you can imagine how that's going to influence the spec, because if we can't afford a certain type of product, you know, I would love to do a lobster dinner, but the budget doesn't say that. The budget restrictions say we're going to have to do a shrimp meal. So those budget limitations are big. Cost and quantity limitations also is how much can I buy. I've had people come in and say, well, we can sell you this toilet paper at this price, but you've got to buy 3 pallets worth. Well, then we go into the whole storage issue. Do I have enough storage that I can hold this? I'm going to pay a lot of money out and hold product for a long period of time. Am I going to use it fast enough? So you kind of get the gist there. So we might also have specific instructions or general instructions on how often we get it, once again, and issues to the purveyors, just in case there's any questions. Kind of an overview, if you will. So those are the specs. Now, is everybody going to sit down and write a spec for ketchup for every one of those things? Probably not. They take a lot of time. You actually can use some outside services to come in and do those for you. The thing is, if you don't write a spec, you can't guarantee your quality levels, you can't guarantee the price, and you can't guarantee the product that you're going to be selling. So, some of the things that also influences the spec when you're putting this together, first of all, is your company goals and policies. You know, we go back to the mission statement. What's your company stand for? What is your restaurant about? Are you about, you know, is your mission statement, we want to make as much money as we can? Or is our mission statement, we want to put out the freshest, highest quality product we can? It doesn't really matter. But that policy is going to definitely influence how you purchase and what type of things you're going to spec out and how you're going to spec it out. Time and money available. You know, there have been times where I've wanted to do something, as I've alluded to, I want to do a lobster dinner, but we don't have the money to do that. I would love to cut my own fresh steaks, but I just don't have the freezer space to go ahead and buy in whole large pieces of meat and then cut them down. And that leads us right into the labor issue, right? Once again, I'd like to cut my own steaks, but do I have the hand quality to do that? I'd like to have fresh soup every day. Do I have the people with the skill level that can make fresh soup versus buying something pre-made? So we've got to look at you know, time, money. Do we have the people to do it? Do I have the storage space to do it? Do I have the equipment to get that done? Again, I alluded to earlier, talked about having a bandsaw. If you don't have a bandsaw, it's pretty hard to break down some of those whole big pieces of meat. So you've got to work within your limits. And it would be great to be able to do everything we'd like to do, but if we don't have some of these things, we can't. Service style, that's another one. The type of clientele obviously is going to influence how we do things, which is going to influence, you know, our spec on a lot of different products. You know, and we talk a lot about food here, but smallwares, plates, silverware, things like that. I use our cafe as a good example. When I first got to the school I'm at, we were using china and silverware. And so when they were buying new things, we'd buy new china, we'd buy new silverware, and it gets incredibly expensive. You've got wear and tear, you've got to have more chemicals with a dish machine. You know, did the service style, the type of food we were serving, did that really warrant that type of product? Or were we better off going with a really good, great disposable, which is what we ended up doing? So what can be some of the problems when we write in specifications? You know, we can still have some issues. You'd think if we set everything down in paper, everything would be perfect. But we can still have some issues. One, we could write a spec that is so tight that nobody can supply us the things we need. In other words, we've made so many different demands on what we want, the product can't be found. Other times we could write a specification that is so loose, in other words, it's so easy, we can get too many bidders, and then it becomes an issue picking which one that we want to deal with. And when we get the product, we find that because the specs were so loose, it doesn't really fit our needs anyway. We already mentioned that government grades can be of no help sometimes because they can be very loose, very non-specific. So if we don't know exactly what to ask for, just saying I want prime or choice doesn't really help us. not having the same level of skill throughout the organization. So the person that writes the spec knows exactly what they're talking about, and they've done an excellent job writing that spec. But then the person that orders it doesn't really understand those specs, and the person receiving it on the dock has no clue of what we're talking about on purchase specifications. So if you don't have good communication and also great understanding all the way through the process, it can still fall apart. So the right product doesn't get ordered, the right product doesn't get accepted. You know, we'll go back to the Apple example, a 63-page Apple pamphlet on USDA.gov, and that's great. And the purchasing person who writes the spec goes in and he goes through that pamphlet word for word and writes a spec for the Apple. But when that comes in on the dock, comes right off the truck from Cisco or whoever, and the receiver, did they open that box up? Did they pull out that 63-page pamphlet on Apples and look through it and try to follow the inspection process as the government recommends? That's not going to happen. The box comes off the truck, they're going to throw it in the cooler as fast as they can so they can get on to something else. So that's where a breakdown of communication and a different level of understanding can really hurt you in the spec. And then finally, another issue is lowballing. And we see this a lot of times, usually in the bidding process, and it happens constantly. You've been buying a product, your number 10 case of ketchup, from Hunt's or whoever for years. Another salesman from another company comes in and says, wow, you're paying too much for ketchup. I can sell you ketchup for $10 less a case. Your initial reaction is usually, wow, that'd be great. I'd love to save $10 a case. If we don't have proper specifications written, who knows what you're going to get in? And I see this all the time. Sales reps come in and they try to sell you by price. Well, we can catch your price on that. It never does anybody want to mention specs or quality grades or intended use. It's we can always save you money. And there's very few ways to save money in this business outside of cutting quality and things like that. So I have a brother-in-law who's a sales rep for a food service company, and I always tell him, if you live by the price, you'll die by the price. In other words, if you come in today and say, I cut your cost by 10%, over the year your price is going to go up and someone else is going to come in and do it later on. We had a sales rep at the last school I was at that would come in and just give tremendous amounts of samples. Beef, whole ribeyes, fillets, just constantly giving us product to try to get us to go with them. And my question to him was, who's paying for this? Well, he said, don't worry, there's no charge to you. But somewhere down the road, somebody is having to pay for that. It's driving the prices up somewhere. All right. So once again, when we go in by price, it's a real issue. So be careful lowballing. Now, I think there's a good discussion question on this. If somebody comes in and says, well, I can sell you chicken for 25% less than what you were buying it for, what do you do? What questions do you ask them? What do you ask them to do to help you work through this situation? Or do you just say, 5%, that's great, we buy a lot of chicken, I'll buy your chicken. We had this very situation with, of all things, chicken strips, where in a cafe, chicken strips are always going to be a big seller. And so we looked at about 12 different types of chicken strips. And we ended up going with one that, in all honesty, was the lowest price by $1 a pound. Now, when you're talking going from $2.50 to $1.50 per pound, that is a huge, huge price difference and a cost savings to us. But we brought them in, we sampled them, we did background on them, and it's an irregular cut. So instead of getting all 2 by 3 inch pieces, some are 2 by 3, some are 1 by 2. So as long as we sell it by weight, people seem to be happy. And also from a taste standpoint, it was a very popular product. They liked it better than some of the others. But when someone came initially and said, I can do chicken strips for $1 a pound less than anybody else on the market, we were skeptical. But we did the due diligence to make sure that they were a good product. So that is a purchasing specification in a nutshell. It seems like a lot of work, and it can be. But trust me, if you don't sit down, do your can cuttings, look at the different products, you'll pay for it in the end. Alright, product specifications in a nutshell. Have a good week. Read your text, do your discussion questions. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.